Hey everybody, my name is Clegg Simpson. I'm with PairSoft. Thanks for joining us today. We know how hard it is to take time out of your day-to-day to be with us, so we really appreciate your time. Today we're going to be discussing a webinar about revolutionizing B2B payments, one check at a time. So today we'll be covering that. I'll be moderating and kind of hanging out in the background for Q&A. If you want to go to the next slide. Before we get started, a couple of things I do want to let everybody know. We are recording today's session and we'll be putting that on YouTube right after we're done today. So you should see that later this afternoon. So if you have any folks that couldn't attend today that you really wanted to see, they wanted to see the webinar, or maybe you can't stay for the whole show, not to worry. Know that we are recording and we are going to have that again on YouTube later on today. And if you do have any questions, please use the Q&A feature. We're hoping to have a little bit of time at the end to discuss Q&A. So if you do have any questions, we can address those for you right here on the webinar. That also helps folks that might have similar questions to you. So again, please feel free to put those right in the Q&A. And if we don't have time, don't worry. We'll be following up. We can write you a quick email, or we can even have a call. So later on in the demo, you're actually going to see a slide with my contact information. So if you do have any questions, or maybe a question popped up as soon as you got off the webinar, don't worry, you can feel free to give me an email, shoot me an email, give me a call, and I can get those questions addressed for you. Next slide, please. So with that, I want to introduce you to today's speaker, Chris Wyatt. Chris comes to us from Finexio, who is our business partner that makes PairSoft pay work. That's going to be the focus of today's webinar is the automation of payments. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thanks, Clegg, and really thanks, to the entire PairSoft team. Finexio is really excited to be partnering with PairSoft to help power their AP payments. And little quick background about me. Finexio is actually my third B2B payments company. And spent a lot of time in the healthcare space where there's a lot of money moving around and a lot of complexity. And what my business partner and I realized over sort of that period of time was there's a lot of opportunity to really sort of optimize how you can deliver AP payments, do it more efficiently, really start to reduce the paper that still exists within the space, really try to move more business payments towards something like we experience as consumers, individuals, where my guess is most of you aren't writing checks every week, every month. And if you are, it's a handful. A lot of ACH payments, a lot of card payments, you're earning cash back, that type of thing. And so a lot of, the impetus around Finexio was, look, there's a better way to help businesses pay their bills more efficiently. As tends to be fairly rote, manual, it's very sort of time consuming and laborious, and it doesn't have to be that way. And so, really Finexio was founded with the belief that if we can empower companies like a PairSoft who do a lot of sort of what we don't do, right? A lot of the procurement, the AP, working with POs and invoices and making sure all the appropriate information gets captured. We're really there to empower, the payments component. So making sure that, vendors, suppliers, really anybody that a business needs to pay gets paid on time in the most, efficient and effective manner as possible. And so that's really where we set out to, create a better experience, really, for partners like a PairSoft. My tenure, I've moved probably several $100 billion within the B2B space. And again, a lot of it started off as check. Most businesses in America still rely heavily on check, if not 50% or more of all their payments traditionally is what we'll see are check-based. And so a lot of what we try to do is migrate those to things like cards, where you can earn potentially cash back, because vendors and suppliers will happily take a card, or things like ACH, direct deposit, think likely how you all get paid every 2 weeks. Money just shows up in your bank. It's a lot more efficient than having to, take a check to the bank and sort of deal with that. It's really the same sort of paradigm that we've tried to embark upon here. So very excited to be here. And certainly happy to, take questions as well at the end. But I thought what we would do today is just start with an initial little poll. And so again, a lot of the focus here is on checks. And so it'd be great to get the idea team that's with this today is, what percentage of your current payments that are, AP related are check? You get a few options here. So we'll give folks, a couple of minutes to click their poison, and we'll take a look at the results. choose. All right, get your votes in. We'll give it another minute or two. And then I don't know if I actually see the results. We'll see what happens here. There we go. All right. Thank you for that. So not surprising. What I'm seeing is we've got, wow, about 70% of you are doing 50% or more. The good news is you're not alone, as you can see here, and this really mimics a lot of what we would see just in the B2B space. Certainly domestically, where the vast majority of payments are still made by check. You probably have some payments that are ACH, wire, maybe some kind of P card program, etc. But not uncommon to see some of our customers and partners where they're 100% check, and that's just how they've always done things. Of course, checks have been around since even before the Greeks were really a powerhouse. So they've been around for thousands of years. It's very common, and typically what we call that is just the inertia. It's like, well, this is how we've done things, and it's difficult to change, and it's something that you always have to do. Everybody has to pay the bills. So not uncommon to see these numbers sort of mimicking what we would see really with any company. So while you're in good company with your friends, the good news is there is a better way, and I think that's part of what we're going to address here. And so one, again, not sure how much you all keep up on what the state of affairs are with checks in the space. There's a great study that comes out every year, typically underwrote by JP Morgan and AFP. The most recent one just came out actually a couple of weeks ago. And some very interesting, and sobering stats as it relates around checks. One of the big reasons everybody's trying to eliminate checks, of course, manual processes. They're time consuming. We've had any number of customers where they spend all day Friday, stuffing envelopes, licking stamps. It can be very tedious. Also, fraud. I think we've all heard about check fraud, check washing. In fact, the USPS now is recommending that if you can prevent sending checks in the mail, do so. Just because it's the #1 fraud vector out there as it relates to payments. The bad guys are very good at stealing checks, falsely endorsing them, whatever you may have encountered. And while sometimes you can certainly recoup the funds, it creates a big headache. And so it's not uncommon to see most organizations having had some type of check fraud just sort of within their tenure. And you guys are probably not alone if you have experienced fraud even fairly recently within the last year. So basically they're inefficient, they're costly, and the risk profile associated with checks is just dramatically higher than a lot of other payment options, again, which we'll touch on here. And the bad news is too, like when checks are stolen, especially if they get cashed, it becomes very difficult to recoup those funds. And so actually this study I recommend, if you guys are interested in B2B payments fraud, it's a fascinating read. And so once the money is gone, it's very difficult to recoup that. And so one of the things we like to highlight, and we're gonna touch on this more, is looking at the alternative payment methods that are available to traditional businesses. And of course, you see in terms of where's the most fraud happening, again, it's checks. So year over year, we actually saw an uptick from 2022, again, which is sobering. We thought it might be decreasing a little bit. And then ACH, you can see, which tends to be sort of the default response. It's like, well, if I'm not going to send a check, we'll just, send a wire. We'll send an ACH credit, to these vendors and suppliers. And the good news is it's definitely safer, but it's still fairly rampant with fraud. And we may touch on this here for a few moments, but typically that's where you're going to see the largest sort of business email compromise, or being spoofed. So vendors getting spoofed, customers being spoofed, where what's happening is they're calling on behalf and saying, hey, I need you to send the money to this bank account now. And typically what we'll see is, some fairly lax controls in terms of verifying that the person you're talking to, the vendor in question who's asking you to update the banking information, is in fact who they say they are. And so that's why we highlight the bottom portion here with virtual cards. And so virtual cards is something PairSoft is able to offer all of their customers in terms of a payment method. and it's vastly safer. You can see, so 2023, only 3% of any sort of attempted fraud was related to a virtual card. And that's because it's you can't falsely endorse a virtual card. Virtual cards are all or nothing, meaning you have to process a card for the exact amount. You can't take it to Amazon or Shein or your sort of favorite e-commerce site. So it becomes a lot more difficult for the bad guys out there to actually do something with it, even if they got a hold of the number. Plus, you're also backed by the card networks, Visa, MasterCard, Discover, as well as the banks that stand behind the card. Just like you as your own consumer, if somebody stole your credit card and went up and charged a bunch of false purchases, you're able to get those funds back. The same concept exists here. And so one of the things we like to educate, really anybody in the space who is looking at payments is, really think about a virtual card first option, and think about other things like ACH, and then really ideally checks are sort of your payment of last resort, if you will. So what we've been able to offer now, PairSoft is going to be able to offer this, in conjunction with Finexio helping to sort of power the back end, is what we're calling card by mail. And so really the intent with card by mail is directly addressing the check issue, where, again, as secure as you might want to think checks are with things like positive pay, et cetera, the criminals are still very good at check washing, stealing checks, and if nothing else, creating a big pain for you. And so what we're able to introduce now is a program where instead of sending a check for a certain cohort of all your vendors and suppliers, we're able to identify those that are able to accept card payments. And rather than have to contact them, have a big sort of long drawn out conversation of, hey, can we switch you to an electronic payment method? We're actually now able to put a virtual card in the mail, in the physical mail. So again, USPS first class mail, and you can see what the difference is. So if there's a check you might send to a vendor, and on the right is basically the exact same information, but a single use virtual card that, again, this is not plastic. It's just printed on a piece of paper, 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. And what happens is the vendor is going to get that. They're going to understand it. They're going to plug the numbers into their terminal. And then typically what's going to happen is it's going to be reconciled and posted that day. They don't need to take anything to the bank. It's extremely secure. In fact, if you saw, 22 times more secure than a traditional check. And there's nothing else they need to do. They don't need to sign up for anything. They don't need to enroll. And what we've seen is dramatic adoption of this. And again, even if you think about just the security profile alone, you've now really, vastly reduced your, really risk profile as it relates to the number of paper payments you're sending. And you're also able to generate revenue. So again, keep in mind, any of the virtual cards that you're able to send through PairSoft also generate a revenue share associated with those. And if it, stronger security, less headaches, more electronic, and then ultimately there's a rev share on top of it. So it tends to be a win-win for the suppliers that are willing and able to accept it. Now, that said, this isn't a panacea. This doesn't work for every single payment. Does not work for every single vendor. Because in some cases, a vendor may not be able to accept cards. It may just not be something that they do. So this isn't intended to be like a complete replacement for checks. But what it's there to do is convert as many of those check suppliers off of check to a card as possible. And then what happens then too, if a supplier or vendor is unable to take it, that's perfectly fine. Again, nothing is forced upon them. They're not mandated to accept this payment. But what it does allow them to do is opt out and say, hey, I can't take this. I won't take this for whatever reason. And then we're able to capture that information. So we'll say, fine, no problem. We are able to send you a check. We'll happily do that. We'll get it in the mail actually today. If you sort of call or interact with us by the cutoff window. Otherwise, it'll be the next business day. And during that process, we're actually able to capture the why. Why can't you take this? I'm unable. I don't want to pay the fees. I don't want whatever it is. And that gives then us, along with the PairSoft team, an opportunity to look for alternative options. Okay, you can't take a check or you can't take a virtual card, but could you maybe take an ACH? Could we sign you up for an electronic payment? Because again, as we saw, that's still significantly safer than sending a check. Or if the answer is just no, we start to capture the information, then we'll still understand why. Maybe they need to be offered merchant services, or maybe it's something they can start to think about, that if that's a capability that they want to add to their payment capabilities. So it's a great way, to drive net new electronic adoption, some additional revenue associated with any revenue share that comes from a virtual card, and of course, significantly safer. Just less headaches, less bother, and for many suppliers, they see it as a benefit. It's just like if you're buying something on an Amazon, they're not going to take cash from you. They're not going to take a check from you. And there's many reasons. The cost of accepting a card is worth it because easier reconciliation. It's a guaranteed payment. An Amazon of the world understands the security associated with it, and ultimately it's going to settle faster. They don't have to take a check to the bank. So that's really the whole impetus around our card by mail program. And again, this is something that you'll be able to take advantage of, through PairSoft and PairSoft Pay. Again, you'll get strong adoption, and we'll look at some numbers here in a second. But the good news is there's a lot of suppliers out there that maybe you've never talked to, never asked them. But if you send them the payment in the mail, the virtual card, they will happily accept it, and they won't ever say a thing. The unparalleled security. Again, we talked about that. These payments are effectively guaranteed, so that both you and your vendor are guaranteed to get paid. And if there is any funny business, you're not on the hook. Again, that goes back to the card networks and the issuing banks. So again, more peace of mind, less you have to worry about. It's certainly more cost efficient. If you're garnering a rev share, typically one card in the mail, if you think about an average of several $100s, it offsets the cost of sending many checks. So all of a sudden now you're able to offset basically all your printing and mailing costs when you do have to send a check. And of course, that's associated with a revenue opportunity. So there's a lot of benefits to this program. Very few sort of downsides. And really, the only downside you think you should all think about, which is fully managed on your behalf, that you don't have to worry about, is that cohort of suppliers that's going to opt out. I can't take this. I won't take this. I don't know what this is. You're covered there. Through PairSoft, that tier 1 support, the ability to opt out and choose a different payment method is fully managed for you. You don't have to worry about it. You'll have full visibility to know how each and every one of those suppliers is being paid. If they said no, if they opted out, you'll be able to know that. But the good news is you don't have to manage that. You just have to understand how the program works, what the value that it brings. And then if there is an issue, if a supplier happens to call you, you just redirect them, let them know, of course, they can receive a check. It'll be in the mail, today. And then the PairSoft team, along with, sort of Finexio in the background, will happily take care of that supplier, make sure that they're covered. So just a couple of examples here in terms of where we've seen some really good success. There's a few of customers that we are proud to be references. If you guys had any hesitation, any concerns, one is called Hogden, another one Northwood Hospitality, so I think hotels, Vicon Construction, so manufacturing. And really, we look at the success of any card by mail program sort of along 3 primary sort of metrics. One, the dollars processed. And so what we're looking at here in terms of Northwood Hospitality. So for every $100 we sent, 45 of those dollars were processed. We never heard a peep from the suppliers. We never heard a peep from the vendors. They just accepted it. So now you've got basically, you just cut your check spend in half effectively. And then for everybody else, again, they can still receive checks, or potentially we have the opportunity to convert them to ACH, to electronic payments, which is fantastic. Same thing with payment transactions. So now this is looking at really the number of payments that were sent. So in this case, if we sent 100 payments, 61 of them were accepted. So again, this is virtual card by mail. So 61 out of what would have been 100 checks were now converted to a virtual card. You're generating revenue. They're safer. And you just, again, reduce your fraud exposure, again, by about 61%, which is a fantastic number. And then the last number, accepted CBM in place of a check. This is really the number of suppliers. So again, same concept. We sent this to 100 suppliers. 63 of them said, "Yep, I'll take it," and never said a peep. We don't hear from them. They happily accept it. They see it as a cost of doing business. And really, this isn't the first time they've likely seen something like this. So card by mail, as an example, has been very prevalent in the healthcare space for well over a decade. Healthcare is sort of funny. They'll also fax payments, which is not something that we support today, but it's not new. So again, this isn't like a brand new novel way to pay. It's really just a better way to pay, I think, is the best way to think about it. And then you can see the average transaction size. So typically, again, this isn't going to target really like your key core strategic suppliers, right? Those are the ones where we're going to proactively call on your behalf, see if we can enroll them on a traditional virtual card via email or via an ACH. but otherwise, average dollar transaction size tends to be pretty low, which also means the cost of acceptance is lower, which then also increases the likelihood that suppliers are willing to take it. So again, this is really who we target: your non-strategic suppliers, not your big guys. Right? We understand the importance of those relationships. Our goal is not to disrupt those, make sure that they're paid the exact way that they want to be paid. These are the smaller suppliers where you have less or infrequent interaction with them, sort of less spend. There's always alternatives, potentially, and that's really who this program is targeted for, and it works very well. And again, this is not really nothing new you need to do other than be aware. And again, the PairSoft team will work directly with you so that you're fully educated. You have all the materials that you need to be successful, especially if a supplier were to call you up. They're there to help support you. And ideally, see is more of your payments being converted to card and lower fraud risk associated with it. So those are really the key takeaways from this. And I know we want to leave a little bit of time for some Q&A. So why don't we just pause here and see if there's any questions that we can answer?
Yeah, sure. So it looks like we do have a few or a couple that were in the Q&A. Let me go ahead and read them off here. So is there a fee if a vendor accepts a virtual card by mail? Is there a fee to the vendor for that transaction?
There's no new fees. So anybody that accepts cards as a matter of doing business, through their merchant processor will have some fee arrangement with them. Just like if you were, had a farmer's market stand and you were going to accept, cards through like Square or something like that, they're going to charge you a fee, but PairSoft in conjunction with Finexio does not charge any fees. So any of those fees that may be borne are something that the supplier has already agreed to accept as a cost of doing business as part of that. So no net new fees are charged.
Great. And then question on kind of, I guess if we could speak more about the value that the vendors get, at least at a high level, when they accept a virtual card versus another form of payment.
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, if you again compare this to a check, right? There is sort of the satisfaction of knowing, hey, this check's not going to be stolen. I'm not going to have that headache. So that's first and foremost. And unfortunately, that does happen. It happens a lot more frequently than I think any of us would like to admit. Two, there's nothing to take to the bank, right? So if you get a check in the mail, typically you're going to have to, endorse it, deposit it, take it to the bank. And that takes time, right? So again, think about, what's having cash now worth to you. So again, just think sort of cash flow timing. And then lastly is really the reconciliation piece. So typically if you're getting a check, you're going to get the check, you're going to take it to the bank. Okay, that check cashed, it's settled now. Now I can go update my accounting software, my ERP, close out that invoice. Most merchant processors, when you're sort of swiping that card or keying it in, that's going to be directly tied to a specific invoice. So when they're keying it in, saying, yep, here's the money, here's the card number, bing, we're paid, it's going to automatically reconcile the books for that supplier, which again is additional value. They don't have to do dual entry. They don't have to wait to see if the check actually clears. They know it clears because again, that's another benefit of the cards. They're guaranteed payments. And so, yeah, a few different things from a security to just speed and ease of use really are, I think, really the three primary components that the supplier should, see and perceive value.
Great. And then we had one I think I could help address is how does this work with PairSoft? So Finexio, again, they're our payment processing partner. Where PairSoft comes in is we provide the software, right? Because that's what we do best. Most of our employees here at PairSoft are actually software developers. So, Finexio is working behind the scenes to actually get the payments to the vendor, offering all the value that you've heard here today, all the features that your vendors get when accepting these types of payments. And what we do is we make that connection possible. So literally you're batching a payment, you're clicking a button, and that's your only role. And that's the software piece to it. And that's where PairSoft comes into play. And of course, just like all of our solutions, we have that native integration with your ERP, your accounting system. So when you click that button, you have that control. You've batched the payments you want to make. They've gone through an approval process. We can help automate the transaction creation, closing out those payables in your accounting system to save you again on more manual work. So that's kind of how it works with PairSoft. Awesome. Anything you wanted to add there, Chris? I know I kind of took that one.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, and look, that's exactly what, Finexio was built for. It's built to power, companies like a PairSoft. So, we're really there to, sort of be the infrastructure and sort of the plumbing as it relates to making sure the money gets to where it needs to go. But, really, letting sort of PairSoft drive that experience, making sure it's exactly what their customers need. That's really what we're here to do. And so we love partnering with the PairSoft team.
Great, great. Then we had one here that just popped in. Looks like they're issuing a high volume of checks for their programs for petty cash and funding requests to support program services. Would we be able to use this card method for in-house check requests?
That's really more of a, I think, so the answer is yes. I mean, typically anybody that can potentially take a card is sort of fair game. And look, if they can't take it, of course, we can always receive a check. So I think if the perceived value there and the desire is there, we can certainly, support that use case. And again, I just so to go back to the healthcare analogy where we did this in healthcare, moving billions, they paid everybody. In fact, if anybody has worked with United Healthcare, this is one of the only ways they will actually pay all the bills, so that a United Healthcare, like the insurance company, will pay to the tune of many, many billions. So yeah, it has broad use cases, and I think it's more a function of who you're sending it to. Do they have the ability and the willingness to accept it? If it's going to work, great. And if not, they always have a secondary option. We can always send that check. So I think the answer is yes, assuming it's business decision that works for you.
Great. And I think you kind of segued there into I think the last question we'll take today. And again, we'll follow up with anybody we didn't get their questions addressed, but I'm going to consolidate a question I'm seeing here is, will all payments be made by virtual card or card by mail? And, the idea here, Chris, is that Finexio offers a variety of different payments that your vendors can choose from. Did you want to kind of speak more on that?
Yeah, happy to. So keep in mind, when you work with, PairSoft, Finexio in the background is going to identify, those high value suppliers, so strategic suppliers where it's worth, a phone call. We'll actually proactively call them and see if we can get them on a card program. If we can, great, because we have the ability to actually deliver the same virtual cards via email, which is even simpler. If they say no, we can certainly offer them ACH. So we really want to give suppliers as much optionality as possible. But then outside of that, this may be for another webinar, we actually use predictive analytics and AI. We'll actually look at the suppliers you're paying, and we're going to be able to identify ones that we just know aren't going to take it, right? So your utility bills, your maybe payments to the insurance company or the IRS or government entities, we just know they're not going to take it, and so that's part of the some of our proprietary data assets that you guys just get. And so no, we're not going to send it necessarily to all suppliers. We're going to send it to all the suppliers that we have very high confidence that are willing to accept it. And again, we know this because we work directly with MasterCard, we work directly with Discover, along with JP Morgan. So we have a very good sense for who can accept, who's willing to accept, who has accepted. And then we're not going to send those payments that we know is just going to cause a little bit of heartache, right? Let's not try to send the IRS a virtual card in the mail. They're not going to take it. So if we got to pay the government, we'll likely just send them a check or an ACH if that's possible.
Good deal. Well, I think that's our time for today. If you wanted to switch over to the last slide there, everyone can see my contact information.
Yep.
So if you did have further questions, or like I said, maybe something pops in your head as soon as you get off the webinar, feel free to take down my information here, shoot me an email, give me a phone call. We could set up a quick chat, quick discussion to get those questions answered, possibly even set up a demonstration for your team or discuss pricing if necessary. So with that, I'll go ahead and say thank you for your time. We really appreciate you joining us. Chris, anything you'd like to leave us with?
No, appreciate you guys. Really appreciate it. Love what PairSoft's doing. So highly encourage you all to give Clegg a call, and we'd love to take care of you.
Great. Good deal. Well, again, thank you for your time, everybody. We appreciate it. Have a good one.
Thanks.